Under the collapsing beams of a house that had no address, the air still smells like milk gone sour. When the fire broke out that night, no one ran to help. No one even screamed. The neighbors, what few there were, stood at the edge of the trees and watched the orange light swell against the fog, as if they'd been waiting for it. Something inside that house had been wrong for a long time. Everyone knew it. The fire just made it visible. By morning, the roof had fallen in. The smoke rose straight into the gray sky like an offering. When the sheriff arrived, he found the bodies sitting at the kitchen table, blackened but still upright, as though they'd waited for breakfast to be served. A man, a woman, and 2 children, though it was hard to tell which was which. Their faces had the same broad nose, the same receding hairline, the same cold, wet eyes that seemed to have melted into each other. It was as if someone had taken one face and pressed it into 4 skulls. The coroner's report described it clinically. Extreme morphological similarity, but the deputy who helped carry them out said it differently. He said, "They all looked like reflections of the same person. He quit the force the next day. Moved 3 towns over. Never spoke of it again." The house itself dated back to before the Civil War, though no record showed who first built it. Locals called it the Old Sutter Place, after the family that had lived there the longest. 5 generations, by most accounts. Always a mother, a father, a son, and a daughter. When one pair died, another seemed to appear in their place. But no one ever saw them marry. No wedding records, no birth certificates. Just new names scrawled in family Bibles that crumbled when touched. In the years before the fire, people whispered that the children never aged right, that they'd stay small too long, then suddenly grow tall overnight, with voices that didn't fit their bodies. Someone said they saw the boy standing in the yard at midnight, facing the forest, talking to something that wasn't there. Another claimed the mother had been seen in town, buying twice as many groceries as a family of 4 could eat. When asked, she'd smile and say, "There are more of us than you think." They found bones beneath that house. Small ones. Dozens of them. Some animal, some not. The sheriff sealed the site and wrote in his final report, "This property will not be resettled. But history doesn't stay buried here. Which city are you watching from? And what time is it right now?" The town sits somewhere between the Blue Ridge and the shadows that maps forget to name. Locals call it Marrowbone, though no state record lists it. You won't find road signs pointing the way. The only path in is a gravel track that bends like a spine through the pines, and the only way out feels longer than when you came in. Even the birds sound different here. Hoarse, clipped, as if the air itself is heavier to breathe. The first settlers came before the railroad, before the war divided the country. They were farmers mostly, running from debts, from lawmen, from themselves. What they found was a valley hidden, so deep that their pasts couldn't follow, and their futures had nowhere to go. The soil was fertile, black and thick as ash, but the forest grew too fast. Trees pressed against their cabins, roots prying through the floorboards. The people who stayed learned to let the land swallow them, a little at a time. By the 1870s, Marrowbone was its own country. No sheriff, no preacher, no doctor. Just a handful of families bound by necessity and by blood. The Sutters, the Cranes, the Ellers. All names that still appear faintly in county ledgers, though the handwriting is different every decade, like the same hand rewriting itself through the years. Those ledgers mark births and deaths, but the same dates keep repeating. Children born the same month, dying at the same age, as if time inside the valley ran in circles instead of straight lines. Strangers who wandered in rarely stayed long. There's a miner's journal from 1891 that mentions a visit. He'd gone looking for coal seams and found something else. A hamlet that feels unfinished, he wrote. Faces that look familiar, though I have never seen them before. The women keep their heads down. The men speak softly, like they are all related and afraid of their own echoes. He left before sunset. 2 weeks later, his horse returned to town without him, its saddle torn, its reins tied in knots no one could untie. Even the government forgot Marrowbone. When the census takers came in 1900, their forms were half filled, then abandoned. One note in the margin reads, "Inhabitants uncooperative, suggest exclusion." After that, the valley was left to itself. And that was the beginning of the end. Because when a place is forgotten by the world, it begins to remember things the world no longer believes in. By the early 1900s, the Sutter's house was the largest structure for miles. 2 stories high, wrapped in porches that sagged under their own weight. Every window sealed from the inside. Smoke from their chimney carried a smell that wasn't wood or food. People said it smelled like something being preserved. That's where the first strange child was born. They said the mother didn't scream during birth. Not once. The midwife, an old woman who delivered half the valley, told neighbors later that the child came too quiet, too still, eyes open before it took its first breath. When she tried to cut the cord, the mother stopped her. "He's not ready to be separated yet," she whispered, her hands slick and trembling. The midwife left before dawn, crossed herself, and refused to ever go back. That child was named Elam, though the name changed in every record that mentioned him. Eliam Elam, sometimes just E. He was small, even for a newborn, with skin so pale it seemed translucent, veins tracing like blue ink beneath. His pupils were milk, colored for weeks, but when they darkened, they didn't match. One brown, one the color of candle smoke. The father, if there was one, never appeared in the baptism registry. Neighbors said he came only at night. A man with a limp and a scar across his jaw, carrying wood from the forest, even when the fireplace already burned. Elam grew fast. Too fast. By the time he was 3, he could speak in full sentences, but refused to speak at all in daylight. By 5, he'd taken to standing at the window for hours, eyes fixed toward the ridge, as if waiting for someone. Once, when the schoolteacher passed the house, she swore she saw him mimicking her movements. Every step, every tilt of the head, like a reflection half a second behind. The other children wouldn't play with him. They said he smelled like the cellar, like wet stone and old iron. When one boy teased him, Elam bit clean through his ear. The wound healed, but the boy's family left the valley soon after, saying nothing. That's when people started locking their doors again, though few could say from what. The mother, May Sutter, aged faster than any woman should. Within a decade, her hair had turned white, her teeth gone soft, her face collapsing inward. The townsfolk called her the widow, though her husband still limped through the woods at night, dragging a shovel behind him. Some said they'd seen him digging holes near the creek, filling them before sunrise. No one asked why. Elam stopped attending school altogether by 9. His handwriting, when he bothered to write, was unnerving. The same word over and over, return, written backward, as if meant for someone reading from the other side. The teacher brought one of his papers to the sheriff, but it vanished from evidence the next day. By then, even the wind seemed to carry his name through the valley. Elam, drawn out, breathless, like something being exhaled after too many years underground. And when the livestock began dying, each animal found laid out perfectly side by side, eyes open, bodies untouched. People whispered that the Sutter boy had finally called something back. No one saw what came out of the woods that winter, only what it left behind. The first snow had barely settled when the Crane family's youngest girl went missing. They found her footprints, leading up the hill toward the Sutter house, and then stopping, cleanly, as if she had been lifted from the ground. The search party found nothing, only silence that felt thick enough to touch. By morning, the Sutter's porch was covered in small, wet handprints. Too small to be May's, too many to be alarms. After that, the valley changed. Windows were nailed shut. Men carried lanterns even at noon. The few children still born came sickly, their faces twisted into uncanny reflections of the Sutters. Wide, set eyes. That same sloping brow, that same uncanny calm. The old people said the bloodlines were crossing too closely, that the valley had folded in on itself like rotten fruit. But no one left. They'd forgotten how. By 1915, Marrowbone was a place of silence and repetition. The same families, the same names, the same graves sinking deeper into the same patch of dirt. When the new schoolteacher, Miss Adeline Bird, arrived from Charleston, she thought the town was merely poor. But within a week, she wrote to her sister, "They are poor in ways the body understands before the mind does." Elam was 17 then, or perhaps 20. No one knew for certain. His height shifted, his voice cracked and deepened. Yet his eyes remained the same colorless shade they'd been since infancy. He walked barefoot even in frost, claiming the ground, knew his steps. He carved symbols into the trees, loops within loops, spirals that never ended. When Miss Bird asked what they meant, he said, "They mark where the blood turns back." To one night, she followed him. Through the pines, through the fog, to the creek bed where the soil never froze. There, she saw him kneeling before a mound of stones, whispering. The ground pulsed faintly, as if something beneath it was breathing. She ran home and locked her door, but she could still hear him outside. Voice calm, asking her to come back, saying, "You look like us now." The next morning, Miss Bird packed her things and left before sunrise. The road was slick with ice, and the fog clung to her wagon for miles. When she reached the nearest town, she was shaking too hard to hold her pen, but she wrote one last letter before being admitted to a sanatorium. "There is no birth or death in that place," she scrawled. "Only return. That winter, May Sutter died, or seemed to. They buried her behind the house, but a week later, someone saw her at the window again. When they dug up May Sutter's grave to see if she was truly gone, they found the coffin empty, except for hair, long strands of white, coiled like roots, filling the box until it overflowed. The smell was of soil and milk. The preacher who led the digging spat once, crossed himself, and left the valley by nightfall. He told no one where he was going. From then on, Elam lived alone in that sagging house on the ridge. Smoke still rose from its chimney, though no one saw him gather wood. The windows stayed covered. Yet sometimes a faint red light flickered through the cracks, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat buried in the walls. Travelers passing through the valley, rare as they were, claimed they heard a low hum when they crossed the ridge, a sound that made their teeth ache. In the spring of 1920, the river flooded. It tore through Marrowbone, washing away sheds, fences, livestock. But the Sutter house stood untouched. The water curved around it, as though guided. When the flood receded, the townspeople found something caught along the creek banks. Small bones, hundreds of them, arranged in spirals, each one carved with the same looping mark Elam had drawn on the trees. The Cranes packed what they could and tried to leave. Their wagon made it halfway down the mountain before it overturned. When the sheriff found them, the horses were gone, the family missing. The wagon was filled with photographs, portraits of Marrowbone's residents. But each face had been scratched away with something sharp, until only the eyes remained. By then, people had stopped calling a lamb by name. They called him the son that stayed, the bonekeeper, the pale one of the hill. The children whispered that if you stood too long at the riverbank, you'd hear him calling, not in words, but in something older, something that reached into the blood and pulled. A drifter, passing through years later, wrote of Marrowbone in a letter never mailed. "There's a house there that listens," he said. "The walls breathe slow. The ground hums if you step too close, and at night, you can see figures moving behind the curtains. Too tall, too thin, their joints bending wrong, their faces blank as wax." By the 1930s, Marrowbone vanished from maps entirely. Roads eroded, trees reclaimed the paths, and the world forgot it once existed. But in certain libraries, old ones, where the dust feels alive, you can still find letters, sketches, fragments of records stamped with a faded seal U.S. Anthropological Survey, Restricted Region Case No. 41 Marrowbone Valley. And in one file, on brittle paper darkened by age, there's a final entry. No date, no author, just one line written in trembling ink. The Sutter bloodline persists. The mother walks again. The son is no longer alone. They say history doesn't vanish. It sinks. And if you dig deep enough, you don't just find the past, you wake it. I came across Marrowbone the way most cursed stories begin, by accident. I was researching forgotten settlements for a thesis. Communities erased from state records. Towns too small or too strange to remember. Appalachia was full of them. But one name kept surfacing in whispers and contradictions. Marrowbone. A place that didn't exist, yet appeared like a ghost between old census forms and property maps, then vanished again the next year. At first, I thought it was an error, a clerical glitch, maybe. But then I found a folder in the archives of the Department of Interior, dated 1952, stamped restorated. Inside were 5 photographs, all identical, a valley swallowed by fog, a house barely visible through the mist. In the center of each image, faint and almost erased, a figure stood by the porch rail, a tall shape, pale against the darkness, facing the camera. The body sharp, but the face blurred beyond recognition. Not by motion, by intent. There was a note clipped to the folder. "Do not send field agents. Site uninhabitable. Blood readings inconsistent." I should have stopped there. Every instinct told me to. But curiosity is its own contagion. It spreads before you know you've caught it. So I went. It took 3 days to find the turnoff. The road that led to Marrowbone was no longer marked, overgrown with switchgrass and briars. The forest felt wrong in that way you can't name. Trees leaning subtly toward the valley, their roots clutching the ground like hands. Half a mile in, the birds stopped singing. The world went quiet. When I reached the ridge, I saw it a hollow of fog where a village once stood. The outlines of houses, collapsing, skeletal, the bones of roofs jutting against the grey, and at the far end, rising crooked and tall as memory, the Sutter house. Its windows were gone, glass replaced by boards. The door hung open, breathing. I stood there for a long time, too long, until I noticed the air moving, not from wind, but from inside the house, as if the structure exhaled through its walls. The ground beneath me felt soft, like it wasn't quite earth anymore. I knelt, pressed my fingers into it. Warm. And when I pulled my hand back, there was a mark. A faint spiral burned into the skin, pulsing once before fading. That was when I heard it, a voice. Distant, but familiar. It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound human either. It just said, softly, "Return." The word lingered in the fog long after it was spoken. It wasn't carried by the wind. It was the wind. A sound that vibrated more than it traveled, crawling beneath the skin and settling in the chest. Return. I told myself it was imagination. The echo of too many nights spent chasing myths. But the valley didn't feel imaginary. It felt sentient, like something watching itself through me. I approached the Sutter house. Each step sank deeper into the ground, the soil giving slightly, like muscle instead of dirt. The porch steps groaned under my weight, though no boards broke. The front door hung ajar, and from inside came a low hum, a steady, rhythmic sound, mechanical at first, until I realized it matched the cadence of breathing. The air in the doorway was thick, tasting faintly of iron and damp wood. Inside, the house looked preserved, not abandoned. Furniture stood exactly where it should be, coated in a thin film of dust, but untouched by decay. A table set with 4 plates, a cradle beside the cold hearth, and on the walls, photographs, hundreds of them, each one hand-developed, sepia and blackened by time. Each one showing the same face, a boy with 2 different eyes. Elam. He stared out from every frame, infant, child, adolescent. But his features never changed, not truly. The same pale skin, the same milk, glass gaze. Only the backdrop aged. The wallpaper behind him peeling, the furniture shifting subtly with each generation. Some photographs had more than one figure. A woman stood beside him in several. A woman with the same jawline, the same eyes, though older each time. Sometimes she held his hand. In others, she cradled him like a child, though by then he looked her equal in age. One photograph was labeled in faint pencil beneath the frame, May and her son. Winter 1903, except the handwriting wasn't old. It looked recent. The hum deepened. I turned toward the stairs. That's when I saw the walls breathing, not metaphorically, literally. The wallpaper swelled and sank, slow and rhythmic, as though something massive moved just beneath the plaster. My flashlight flickered. For an instant, I thought I saw faces forming in the paint, dozens of them, merging and fading. Some childlike, some old, all similar. I moved toward the staircase. Each step released a faint sigh, the boards cool underfoot, like damp stone. Halfway up, I noticed something carved into the banister. A spiral, looping endlessly, freshly cut. At the top of the stairs, a door stood slightly open. Behind it, a faint light glowed red, pulsing in sync with the hum. I pushed it open. Inside was a room filled wall to wall with jars, glass canisters sealed with wax. Each one contained hair, teeth, fragments of bone, some labeled with names crane, Ella, bird, and in the center of the room stood a shape, tall, thin, motionless. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, its skin stretched taut and pale. Then it moved, slowly turning its head toward me. 2 eyes stared out, one brown, one the color of candle smoke. Elam. I whispered. It smiled. The sound that came next wasn't a word. It was a wet exhale, a greeting, and from behind him, another voice answered. Older, softer, a woman's voice, trembling through the floorboards. Welcome home. The sound of her voice froze the air. It didn't echo. It soaked through the walls, trembling like something spoken underwater. I turned toward it, though I already knew where it came from. Beneath the floorboards. Elam, I whispered again. But he didn't answer. He just watched me, head tilted. That uneven gaze fixed on my throat. His mouth twitched as if remembering how to form a smile. The woman's voice came again. Closer now. Do you know why you came here? The floor creaked. Dust rose in thin ribbons from the cracks. I stepped back, shining my light down. Beneath the warped planks, the ground moved, Slowly, breathing, Elam took a step toward me. He was barefoot, though the floor should have cut him open. His feet left faint, wet prints that shimmered as though filled with light. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. I came to learn. He blinked, slow, deliberate. Then remember. The word hit me like a pulse. For an instant, the room around me rippled. Furniture warping, walls shifting. The photographs on the walls changed, the faces rearranging, their features softening, merging, until one of them looked like me. Same jaw, same eyes. And in that moment, I felt it. A slow recognition rising not from thought but from blood. I wasn't the first to come here. I was the one who left. I saw flashes. Images that didn't belong to memory but to marrow. A valley wrapped in fog. A woman's white hair tangled across my child fingers. A voice whispering, "You must leave before it starts again." And now, I had come back. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, almost pleading. I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear against the boards. From below came a faint rhythm, like many heartbeats beating as one. The voice, her voice, rose through the wood. "You are ours. The blood calls you home. All things that leave must return." The boards cracked. Splinters tore upward as the floor began to breathe faster, like lungs about to gasp. I stumbled backward, slamming against the wall. Jars shattered around me, spilling hair and bone that scattered like insects. Elam reached for me, not violently, but gently, palm open. His skin glowed faintly now, light moving beneath it like fireflies trapped in veins. "Mother's waiting," he said. "We've kept your place." I ran. Down the stairs, through the breathing walls, out the door into the choking fog. The valley itself seemed to move, the trees bending, the earth soft underfoot. And behind me, from the house, came the sound of hundreds of voices, whispering in unison, "Return. Return. Return." I didn't stop until I reached the ridge. But when I looked back, the valley was gone. Only forest, only silence. And yet, when I reached my car hours later, I saw it in the reflection of the windshield. A handprint, small, pale, wet. It was on the inside of the glass. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, but because I was afraid of what sleep might remember for me. I drove until the fuel gauge bled dry somewhere outside the mountains. The fog had thinned by then, but it didn't disperse. It followed, clinging to the tree line like it knew where I'd go next. Every few miles, I glanced into the rearview mirror, and each time, for the briefest second, I saw a face behind me, not Elam's, my own. By dawn, I found a motel along a nameless road. The clerk didn't speak much, only stared too long when I handed him my ID. His eyes flicked between my name and my face. Then he said, very quietly, "Had another one of you through here years back." Same eyes. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't have to. Inside the room, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and something older, soil maybe, or rot. I turned on the bathroom light, leaned toward the mirror. My reflection stared back, but wrong. My pupils looked uneven now, one slightly darker than the other. I blinked. The difference grew more visible, like the glass itself wanted to confess something. I pressed my hand against the mirror. My skin was cold, but the glass was warm. And from behind it, faint as breath against fog, something whispered, "You found your way back." I stumbled backward. The voice wasn't from the mirror. It came from inside me. The mark on my palm, the spiral burned into it back in the valley, had darkened. It pulsed once, twice. And then the visions came. Flashes of generations repeating like loops of film. Faces identical through centuries. Bloodlines refusing to thin. May Sutter, holding her child who wasn't a child but a continuation. A lamb. standing at her side in every decade, unchanged. And always the whispering chorus from beneath the soil, calling their descendants home. Marrowbone had no graveyard because nothing there ever died. The bodies decayed, but the blood remembered. It waited dormant for the stray pieces of itself that had wandered away, for the ones like me. I tried to steady my breathing, but every exhale came out synchronized, a beat too late, as if something inside me was breathing alongside. I understood then, return wasn't a command. It was an inevitability. The Sutters didn't inbreed out of madness. They did it to preserve something ancient that couldn't survive dilution. And when the world forgot them, that blood reached outward, through generations, through names, through me. I pulled my sleeve up to look at my arm. The veins glowed faintly beneath the skin, moving. Crawling, there was a knock on the door, slow, rhythmic. 3 taps. Pause. Then 3 more. I froze. The same pattern echoed from the motel walls, the floor, the ceiling. And under it, that same voice, soft, maternal, inescapable. Come home, child. The lights flickered. The wallpaper began to breathe. And before the darkness swallowed the room whole, I saw my reflection smile, even though I hadn't. I don't remember deciding to drive back. Only the road stretching endlessly through the pines, the fog thickening until the world behind me disappeared. The car's headlights could barely cut the gray, and yet I didn't slow down. My hands gripped the wheel, but the motion wasn't mine. It felt like being guided. By dusk, the last gas station was gone, the signs unreadable, the air growing heavier, sweeter, like rot covered in honey. I realized I was already back in the valley, before I saw it. The trees parted the way they had before, bending inward as though bowing to something sacred. And then, there it was, the Sutter house, whole again, not sagging, not rotting, but alive. Its boards gleamed with moisture, its chimney smoked faintly, breathing in rhythm with the hum that filled the air. Every window now glowed with that same soft red light. I stepped out of the car. The ground pulsed underfoot. The soil was warm again. No longer mud, but flesh. The front door was open for me. Inside, the house waited exactly as I had left it, jars unbroken, photographs still covering the walls. But now each photograph showed a new face, mine. In one, I was a child. In another, an old man. In all of them, behind me stood Elam, his hand resting on my shoulder. He appeared at the top of the stairs, tall and silent. His expression was not anger. It was welcome, the same faint smile he'd worn before. "You came back," he said. It wasn't a question. "Why me?" I asked, though my voice came out quieter than thought. He tilted his head. "Because you never left." The floor beneath us opened, not breaking but unfolding. The boards curled back like petals, revealing a slow, luminous pulse below. It wasn't a basement. It was a heart. Through the cracks, I saw them. Bodies half submerged in the living soil, faces serene, eyes open and unblinking. The Sutters, the Cranes, the Ellers, each one breathing faintly, their chests rising with the same rhythm as the earth. Their skin was pale as wax, but their veins glowed red, feeding downward into the soil. "Hom," Elam whispered. "One never die. We only remember." I took a step back, but the air was thick now, pulling me downward like water. The hum filled my skull, vibrating my bones, until I couldn't tell if I was hearing it or becoming it. The spiral on my palm burned, my vision blurred, and then, the woman's voice again. "Lay down, my son. The blood knows its place." I looked at Elam, and for a brief, trembling instant, I saw my own face behind his. Older, gaunter, but unmistakably mine. He reached out his hand, and when our palms touched, the world stopped breathing. The red light swelled, the hum rose to a single endless note, and the house began to sink. Not collapse, descend. Slowly, beautifully, back into the earth that had birthed it. The last thing I saw was May Sutter's reflection in the window, smiling, proud, and in that final breath before the soil closed over me, I understood Marrowbone was never a place. It was a lineage, one that waited, patient and eternal, for the moment all its scattered fragments came home. I didn't scream. I only whispered the word that had always been waiting in my throat. Return. The first tape was found in 1989. A forestry crew clearing land for a new transmission line unearthed a rusted tin box 6 feet beneath the roots of a fallen oak. Inside were 6 cassette tapes wrapped in oilcloth, labeled in smeared ink Marrowbone recordings, 1963. The man who found them turned them in to the county office. They were passed along to the university's anthropology department, then to a small federal agency in Washington that no longer exists on paper. No one knew who the speaker on the recordings was. His voice was quiet, unsteady, but articulate, educated. He described driving into the hills, interviewing a family named Sutter, and a red light that came from beneath the ground. The tapes were never made public. In 1994, a researcher named Dr. Eliza Kearney requested access to them for a study on rural folklore. She was denied twice. On her third request, she was granted a single supervised listen. Her notes, declassified 20 years later, describe an ambient hum between words, consistent across all tapes, and a second voice overlapping the narrators, lower in tone, possibly female. The transcripts she made have large sections redacted, but what remains reads like scripture or prophecy. The house breathes. The walls remember. The soil beneath moves when you stand still long enough. They told me not to come back, but I never left. My blood stayed. My name stayed. If you dig deep enough in these mountains, you'll find the faces you thought you buried. Dr. Kearney wrote one final note before the project was closed. She underlined it twice. The speaker believes he is part of the family he studied. He speaks as if the land itself absorbed him. After 1995, there were no more mentions of Marrowbone in any official record. The tapes disappeared from the archive in 2003 during a routine catalog reorganization. When investigators searched, they found that the tin box was gone, and the shelf where it had been stored had buckled, as if from extreme heat. 3 years later, hikers in southwestern Virginia reported strange phenomena near a restricted forest zone. Faint lights under the ground, a rhythmic vibration through the soil at night, and a whispering sound, not carried on the wind, but coming from below. Locals call it the pulse. They say it happens once every generation, when the old blood stirs. Dr. Kearney retired shortly after her research was sealed, but before she vanished from public life, she published one small paper under a pseudonym. The title, A Cause of Inheritance in the Appalachian Substrate. Buried in the footnotes is a single line no one noticed until years later. The valley is growing again. The lineage never ended. It waits beneath the roots. When federal surveyors returned to map the area in 2010, the valley wasn't there. Topographically, the land was flat. But the instruments malfunctioned whenever they passed a certain point, their compasses spinning wildly, their radios filling with static that sounded almost like breathing. In 2017, a woman from Nashville submitted a DNA sample to an ancestry database. She was 30, too healthy, married, with no reason to expect anything unusual. Her name was Caroline H., though that name means nothing now. What mattered was what came back. A cluster of genetic markers that didn't match any known population group in the region. a lineage that seemed to originate from a single valley in Virginia that, according to the database's geographic model, no longer existed. At first, she thought it was a glitch. She wrote to customer support. They told her it wasn't. The markers were consistent with a family group that had not interbred with outsiders for over a century. The system identified the lineage only as Marrowbone Sample Cluster 001. 2 weeks later, Caroline began to dream of places she had never seen: a church without a steeple, a red-lit house that seemed to breathe, and faces, endless faces, identical but aging at different speeds. She told her husband she was fine, that it was just the test unnerving her. But she started waking with soil under her fingernails, though she hadn't left her apartment. One morning, she found a spiral drawn in the condensation on her bathroom mirror. The same shape she'd seen in her dreams, the same one carved into the wooden doors of the Sutter house in those old photographs she found online. 3 months later, she received a call from another woman who had matched her DNA. 4.6% shared genetic material. "I think we're related," the caller said. "I've had the same dreams." They compared notes. Both had red marks forming on their palms, like burns in the shape of spirals. Both had started hearing a faint low hum at night, like an engine running somewhere deep below their homes. They weren't alone. By the summer of that year, over a dozen people across 4 states had begun reporting the same thing in online genetic forums. Most had family roots in Appalachia. All traced their DNA to the same forgotten coordinates, and all described the pulse. At first, researchers dismissed it as hysteria, a viral myth born of folklore and coincidence. But the patterns were too precise. The dreams began aligning: names, dates, landscapes that matched the declassified 1930s maps of the Marrowbone Valley. And then one of them, a man from Kentucky, vanished. His last post read, "I'm going to find it. I think I've been hearing it since I was a child. I think it's calling us home." 3 weeks later, his truck was found at the edge of a Federal Reserve, engine still warm, keys in the ignition. There were no footprints leading away, no signs of struggle. Only a single palm print on the driver's side window, a spiral drawn in blood. Those who had been talking to him online stopped posting soon after. Their accounts went silent, their profiles deleted. But the hum didn't stop. Neighbors in their towns began reporting vibrations in the ground, electrical interference, radios tuning themselves to static that whispered names. The soil around their houses grew darker, richer, damp as if newly turned. The old blood was waking, and somewhere beneath the mountains of Virginia, the heart of the valley was beating again. It began quietly, as most resurrections do, a faint tremor in the soil, birds abandoning the ridges before dawn, and then the air changed. It carried that old, wet, iron scent that precedes rain, or rot, or something newly born. Satellite images showed nothing. To the world above, the valley was still gone. But to those who belonged, to those whose veins still carried the buried pulse, the coordinates began to whisper themselves back into existence, not as numbers, but as a feeling, a direction, a gravity. Caroline was the first to go. She left her home on a Sunday night, barefoot, her phone abandoned on the kitchen counter. No one saw her drive east. But traffic cameras caught a dark sedan moving along a forgotten road, headlights off, until it passed beyond range, into the black seam of the Appalachian folds, where the road turns to dirt and then to nothing. Others followed, 36 in total, each drawn from different states, different lives, some by dream, others by sound. All of them shared the same blood, the same spiral, shaped scar blooming in their palms like a birthmark that had finally ripened. By mid-autumn, the forest rangers began finding things. Car doors hanging open, piles of clothing at the tree line, and below the roots of the oldest oaks, prints. Bare feet, hundreds of them, pressing deeper than human weight should allow, leading downhill toward what maps now labeled simply as non-existent terrain. Then came the lights. From miles away, locals reported a red glow breathing under the fog. Not a fire, not lightning. A rhythmic flare, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. The sound followed next. Low, sonorous, pulsing through the ground until the windows shook. Cows wouldn't feed. Dogs wailed and bit at the dirt. And somewhere deep below, a door that had been closed for more than a century began to open. They said the valley rose back into the world that night. Not rebuilt, but remembered. The soil shifting like muscle, the trees bending to form its shape again, and at its center, where the Sutter's house once stood, there was movement. Figures standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces indistinguishable in the red glow. Witnesses claimed they saw Caroline among them, standing at the front, eyes open but unseeing. Her mouth moved as if whispering something older than language, something that didn't sound learned but remembered. A pulse-given voice. "We are the marrow of this place," she said, "and the earth remembers what it made." At dawn, the light vanished. By the time investigators arrived, there was nothing left. No footprints, no sound, no scent of burning. Only a circle of ground turned black, perfectly round, warm to the touch. When they dug into it, the soil bled, and beneath it, a layer of bone. Fresh, the valley had fed again, and as it always had, it buried itself once more, leaving only the hum behind. If you go there today, you won't find anything. Just trees, wind, and the illusion of silence. But if you listen closely, if you stay very still when the night thickens, you can hear it. The breathing earth. The pulse of old blood, counting generations, waiting. Because nothing ever dies in Marrowbone, it only sleeps. And one day soon, it will wake again.